Okay, so my presentation is on the scientific method and basically how wisdom relates to that. And where a lot of you looked for wisdom sources talking about relationships or coaching, I looked for scientists talking about wisdom, which is a little bit different. So why did I decide this topic for my presentation? Science today is more distrusted than ever. If you look at Earth Day protests, you had scientists in the streets protesting for the environment. And it's mainly because politics have become involved. If you look back to the election, polls were typically wrong about who was winning the race, what was happening. So why does this distrust exist? Really, one good example is vaccinations. I'm sure people have heard that vaccinations cause autism. And if you look at the study that produced this, the guy had no references, he made up most of the data, and there was really no correlation between vaccinations and autism. But because the news outlets picked this topic up, people automatically believed it is true. So we're getting this distrust, and if you look at wisdom, a universal language that goes across cultures, you can really hopefully bind the two together to learn to trust science. So the scientific method, and I distilled it down to its most simple form, is simply observe, hypothesize, and this is basically you're going to ask a question, form an experiment, and then a conclusion. So you're going to make a conclusion based off of what your experiment showed you. So first, observing, I took a quote from the Tao Te Ching, and this was an online adaptation, it's not the one we used in class, and it has, human must achieve the ultimate void and maintain calmness with sincerity in order to observe the growth and flourish of all beings. It is in the way that one can observe, understand the law of nature, all things and beings will eventually return to their original source. So I like this because it speaks to the observation part of the scientific method. If you're to make a clear observation, you really need to clear your mind. If you introduce a bias from there, the rest of the process is going to be wrong. So just like in the vaccination scenario, the guy thought that vaccinations led to autism. All of the data he then created showed that, regardless of it being true. Now this is a scientist. She's actually a doctor at a university in India, and she teaches science and the scientific method to Buddhist monks. And I really like this quote from her. She says, "When the true eye functions, it goes beyond looking and enters the realm of seeing. Looking speaks to what things are, seeing reveals what else things are. The hidden aspect of reality. The reality of a rock, a tree, a mountain, a dog, or a person." So when I wrote my paper, I really talked about what she had to say a lot, because she talks about how science actually reinforces to her a lot of the aspects of Buddhism. She talks about how if you break things down to their simplest form, you're simply at atoms and neutrons, protons, and electrons. So really everything is composed of the same material and the same life. So hypothesis, this is basically the questioning part, it's what's up. And the real issue comes from courage. A lot of times people don't want to question things that are known or look into the unknown. So if you already know that something's established, you question how it should be addressed. But if you look at like the Earth being flat, that was basically conceived, that's what people thought for the longest time, and it took actual questioning of a known topic to determine this. So I took a quote from the Bhagavad Gita: "No one should abandon duties because he sees defects in them. Every action, every activity is surrounded by defects as fire is surrounded by smoke." And that part must be cut off. So basically, you shouldn't avoid what you're looking to achieve because it's going to be hard, but you should attack it head on. So now experiment, when I was going through this whole process, it reminded me a lot of the story of Job. So if you're not familiar with that, God and Satan are talking. They see one of God's great worshipers. That's basically, he's doing his job. He's following the path that God has set for him. He has a great life. And Satan says, well, Job only looks up to you because you're giving him everything. If he had nothing, he would turn his back on you. So this to me really illustrates a good experiment. So they see an observation of Job being a good worshiper, then they make a hypothesis. Satan says that if you take everything away from Job, he'll turn his back on you. So they set an experiment, and that's what they do. They take pretty much everything away from Job except his health. And then after the experiment, they deal with the conclusion. So Sarah Lazard of Harvard Medical School, this was another area that I really liked looking into. So she looked at basically the crossing of meditation from science to religion, and she determined that meditation really does increase the amygdala size, and what this is used for is your nerves, so really how nervous you are, anxiety, depression, all of that was scientifically proven. So here you can see an example of a good experiment, and Sarah, what she ended up doing was crossing over science to a religious practice and meditation. So conclusion is really one of the hardest steps. Just like in the vaccination example I gave you, if you're afraid to accept the conclusion regardless of the experiment, then you may change. So I took 2 quotes that talk about failure and what that means. So one quote is from the Tao Te Ching, chapter 79. It says, "Failure is an opportunity. If you blame someone else, there's no end to the blame. Therefore, the master fulfills her own obligations and corrects her own mistakes. She does what she needs to do and demands nothing of others." So in many cases, when science does go basically a fraud, this is what you need to look back to, and failure is okay, and you simply reform a new hypothesis and continue to grow. Another quote I took for this was Proverbs 24, "For a just man falls 7 times and risen up again, but the wicked shall fall into trouble." So you just need to reevaluate your goals and reset them, and that's really what the scientific method is about. It's not about proving things, but it's about investigating why things occur and hopefully developing an explanation for what's occurring. So if the tools of wisdom and science can be shared, I think you can bridge between all people. So regardless of politics or what faith you are, I think there's a lot of science that is based off of religion, and there are similarities you can draw. And then here are the various references I used. There was a really good study done from Harvard, the neuroscientist, that I quoted about the amygdala. I thought that was really interesting. So, that is my presentation.
Nicely done, man.